Hello hero, it's Lucy Lannon. This one's for the collective. I'm going to broadly call it a spiritual speaking rather than a spiritual reading, because reading may turn off some of you who are coming to this for the first time from different communities to my own. I say that specifically because what inspired this reading was a very accurate speaking of what was labelled by that person as prophetic word, which spoke to what I know to be true from a different paradigm, and indeed spoke on my personal circumstances with a level of detail which I found astonishing and would expect from my own community, but perhaps not the wider religious one. And I'm talking really, how do I say this without incriminating myself? I'm talking descriptions of events that happened within my own home that I've not told anyone about, right? So this was legit, and that's why my ears pricked up when it came onto my feed. But also, as often happens with people from certain backgrounds, it did devolve into promoting something monetarily, which I felt was a corporate endeavour under the guise of religiosity, and indeed leading back to a channel which promotes religious hate speech, particularly to channels that do divination. Now, quick note for anybody that's stumbling on this who is Christian and sort of a bit hackled by what I've just said there. I am someone who uses cards, amongst other things, to relay messages that I feel are from energetic good, from the divine. I purposely protect all my transmissions in prayer and in using psalmic techniques from my ancestry against anything which is not that, against anything which is not for our highest good collectively, against anything which is not archangelically seen over. So I am not a person who is besieged by demons, besieged by monitoring spirits, all of these other things that you see bandied around the internet at the moment in order to promote religious hate speech against anybody from the New Age, from witchcraft paradigms, which often are Christian syncretic, by the way, certainly in my part of the world, and who, are basically work with Christ-like energies, or indeed with Christ directly, but are not from the structure of the church politically, because we don't always agree with the broader work that structure does, right? It may be a surprise to many of you to learn that many witches, many ceremonial magicians especially, are using techniques, protections, prayers, and tales from the Abrahamic traditions to also do the work of God. And I say that because I'm going to put certain things in the hashtags this time around that invite all people to my channel, because I really believe that all people have a place here. That also includes people who think that both of those paradigms are bollocks, people who are atheists or skeptics, or dare I say, come from a satanic angle in terms of what they've read, but perhaps want to do the highest good for everybody in their lives and are looking to other perspectives. Because you can't have those other perspectives intervene if those perspectives, those peoples are so afraid of you that they won't let you look into it. And I do feel that's a problem with Christianization in general, particularly in America, but worldwide. So my background, very briefly, is I come from a long line of Christian syncretists who are witchcraft practitioners, cunning people in various traditions globally. Some of those include Irish traditions, ancestors from Dagestan before Muslim conversion who were doing indigenous witchcraft practices. I also have lineage towards Egypt, as many of us do in this part of the world. I have some Viking in me, I have some Scot in me. I don't really work with those because I don't know enough about where and when. But certainly the things that I have always been pulled towards in my own practice, even when I was told that those practices were culturally appropriative, have turned out to be things that are very directly in my blood and in my ancestor work. And I would urge you, if you're being told that your particular inclinations towards various pantheons are fake or appropriative or not politically correct, I would urge you to look into your own background if you are able, and see whether actually there was crossover there, because I do think that's an interesting exercise as well. I can do a larger video on that if you want me to, but so that's my more sort of pagan background. And then in terms of this relationship to the word or to prophetic word or whatever, I've read the Bible many times. I was in 2 Catholic schools growing up because they had disabled facilities that no other schools had. So I was that rare kind of heretic within the room of Catholics because of the facilities that I needed, and the fact that a Christian couldn't exactly turn me away, even as they burnt down the shops of my forefathers, right? So there's a complex relationship there, and I point it out at great length just to say, whoever you are, you're welcome on this channel, and if you've stumbled on this information is for you. I occasionally use cards from the Fallen Angels Oracle deck. That's not because I personally work with demons, it's because I work with the Judeo-Christian archangelic paradigm, and some of those names are in there, and the cards are useful as mere symbols to relay to me what it is that I need to relay back to you. Because yes, I receive, in the same way as those people hashtagging prophetic word everywhere, you know, I get dreams, I get visions, I get what we in mediumship would call the clairs, right? Touch, taste, etc., etc. But I also, primarily as a tarot reader, relate to symbols and the visual world, and that's partly because my arts background filters into that and sort of reinforces any religiosity. So if you're an artist, you're welcome here. If you're a Christian, you're very welcome here. If you're an atheist, absolutely you're welcome here. Treat it as a thought experiment. See whether you're interested by anything I say. If you are pagan, love you. I'm sort of one of you in a way. You're welcome here. You know, witches, magicians, cunning folk, and then everyone from every other religion. You know, I have Hindus popping in to look round the corner. I have Muslims who are curious about my services privately. I believe I have a couple of Sikhs here and there. You know, wherever it is that you hail from, what we're dealing with when I give you my messages is an energy force, which I am filtering to transmit only what is beneficial and good for the whole. The best analogy I can offer for that, and I apologise if I've said it already, is the Force in Star Wars. I don't believe that Star Wars is holy. I'm not being a chaos magician in the true sense when I say this, but it's the best example that I can give of the idea that there is an energy and a mystically flowing through everything, and that people can wield that energy in positive or negative ways. Now, all of that is a precursor to say that I felt that the messages that I received this morning were for positive reasons, and they were speaking to something which I know to be a truth within my own paradigms, which include witchcraft and astrology and so forth, but also that they were coming from an evangelical background, which sadly, when I traced back the channel, having been intrigued by the guy being right, does perpetuate hate speech, does say things about readers like we deal with demons, or like we're all evil, or like the pagans should all be cast out, and or worse, which I think you can agree with me when I say that's not very Christ-like, it's not very kind, and indeed Jesus will be flipping tables if he could hear these people. So this is me kind of speaking to the same stuff using where I'm from. And I'm going to mark it as that's the intro, because many of you are returning subscribers, love you dearly, or people who are already in tarot circles, witchcraft circles, etc. And you won't need to hear what my background is, but it's important at the moment that I'm speaking to all people, because this is a neutralization of a transmission, or not neutralization, it's a neutral retelling of what was a transmission for a very specific angle. And some of that angle was hate speech, and some of it was corporate. I believe the guy was promoting a movie, right? Which I'm sure he makes a good deal of money off, even if it's for the right reasons. what do I want to say on that? There's another tiny little bit there. It's gone out of my mind completely. Come on, come back. Come back, little bird. No, I'll edit it in if I remember what I was going to say there, but right. So what did he actually say? You don't need to know the bit that he relayed that was to my personal circumstances, partly because I have been less visible on the channel since October because I've been doing my own spiritual work, which has been quite hefty, and I've been unpicking some personal circumstances to see what is a form of energetic attack, which I know the background of through divination, and I know who's sending it and why, and that it's sort of fairly easy to deal with because she's a bit young and silly. It's to do with the twin flame journey, guys. I roll, right? But I was unpicking what was that and what was broader stuff being sent to me on a kind of spiritual shift type level. Whether or not you are spiritually inclined, I think you can agree that world events at the moment are showing that there is a transition from one kind of global mental paradigm to another. And this is what we talk about when we talk about things like awakenings, things like collective shifts. I'm not somebody who talks in, Arcturians, starseeds, Atlanteans, all this sort of stuff. Partly because, particularly with the starseed narrative, I think it's a very convenient religious cope for how we've destroyed our own planet to say that we are potentially descended from the stars, right? It would be such a convenient get out to say, well, you've wrecked this one, but don't worry, mummy and daddy are coming to pick you up. And I feel very conflicted about those kinds of terms. So I'm not going to be speaking to the normal New Age language that is used around these things. And if any of that hits home with you, I invite you to dwell on it and think about it and maybe sort of go over it in your own work. But what I will say is that astrologically, in the same way that many of the community very accurately foretold what was going to happen in 2020, for a lot longer, many of the community have been talking about big things that are happening between now and 2026, which are going to have very material, very real ramifications for many of the people on our planet, right? I don't say that to fearmonger. I don't say it to get more hits, get more views, although do like and subscribe if you enjoy me so far, because I could do with a boost, right? Because this is my day job. This is how I energetically have the exchange of earning my keep, right? You can donate down below as well if you feel called, but you don't have to. That's where Christianity and I differ. I don't demand a tithe, right? Because I'm here just to help and I know I'll be provided for. But anyway, there has been a broader picture speaking to all of this in magical currents, in astrological currents, in political predictions, in people talking about how certain conflicts may start and where they may stem out of and what might begin certain big world events. And indeed in the dialogue around natural disaster and the increase of same and sort of how that relates to world history, shall we say. I'm not going to speak more to any of those things individually, and I hope you'll understand why, in terms of me being on a very public platform and being very careful about what I say. But let's just say that the guy that I watched this morning was speaking to those same currents, those same tides, those same transitions, and he was attributing some of it to the same places and peoples that I would attribute some of it to, and warning people of a Christian ilk to be wary of certain structures, certain forms of informational energy, to be very vigilant about what it is they take in. Now, this relates back to my own sort of practice in the last 2 weeks, because in kind of dealing with this stuff that's been happening at home and learning a lot more in terms of new techniques for myself to ward against that kind of shenanigans, I've been also trying to address the practical, trying to address the material in a more significant way, which could be variously characterised as prepping versus organising myself so that things become habitual, so that I can be more efficient for you guys in what I put out. So some of the things I've been doing are things like looking into if pharmaceutical systems were not as they currently stand because of certain mineral acquisitions around the world, etc., or certain being very careful here, certain political changes which would affect distribution of certain things. What is it in terms of my required preventative medications following surgeries, strokes, etc., that I would need to get from other sources, and how do I do that, etc. And I was guided and advised toward that via a long sequence of kind of personal revelations and dreams and things, which led me to a specific course by Gordon White, who is the man, by the way. And then on the other side of it, the more sort of, less preppy, less like, oh, it's all going to end in tears kind of end of it, if you don't want to think like that, I've been looking at how to practically implement certain things, and I've come across a phrase in a self-help book, of all places, that said, if it's not a fuck yes, it's a no. And I believe I've said that elsewhere on the channel before. I believe it's come up in a reading before, and if you are seeing this after that reading, this is your confirmation you're in the right place. But it's something I've been trying to implement more broadly to every aspect of life. If it's not a fuck yes, it's a no. That goes for spiritual practices. That goes for conversations with friends. That goes for any aspects of work that you can not avoid, because I don't want us to shirk on our work, but anything that is not pertinent to your purpose within your work realm is, I need to do the minimum amount on this so that I can focus my attention on what it is that I know I'm here for, right? And that will only speak to some of you because we're not all fully vocational or whatever, but just in your private time, in your spiritual time, pretty much everywhere. And especially for those of us preparing in this time by loosing ourselves off certain belongings, certain sentimental artifacts that are tying us to a time that we no longer are affiliated with. If it's not a fuck yes, it's a no, is sometimes a much more useful rule than does it spark joy, right? So there's that element as well. So I am speaking to the material, I'm also speaking to the structural, I'm speaking to what you include in your life going forward, what it is that your 2-year, 5-year, 10-year plan looks like. And I say that with the caveat that the following few years are not going to be what you expect, my dudes. They're not going to go exactly how you planned them. Indeed, when does it? But in a broader sense, globally and politically and all the rest of it, I don't think that the times we're kind of coming up against are going to look like how you envision them. But I think that it becomes even more important under that to make sure that anything which is extraneous to what you know feels good and what you know it is your job to do to make other people on this earth feel good and to help everybody's development and to help us to be kind, anything that isn't that, anything that isn't the good or the light side of the force, if you like, it needs to go now, right? Some of you have been working with dark goddess paradigms, you've been doing purging with deity, entity that is to do with that. And again, for my Christians, I would point you to the Bible, that there are some forces of destruction for good, particularly in the Old Testament, right? There are things that need to be knocked down in order that a world or a personal world is rebuilt. And I think some of the more problematic focus that we've had culturally on main character energy, like some of it, yes, is cultural narcissism and is a bit sort of wittico and not so great. But the other side of that is that the focus on the individual and the sort of non-problematic side of this cultural individualism we've had since the 70s for largely corporate purposes, but that's beside the point. The gift of that, because everything carries gifts, is that we are examining on an incredibly individualistic level what it is that we need to keep going forward in order to be what Caroline Myss would call the greatest crew member we can be, what Jesus might call the best disciple we can be, what witches may call the most effective agent of the gods that we can be. You know, you do you in how you describe that. But in doing the work, which I speak about broadly on this channel, many of us are being called to go through a period of comparative isolation in order to examine what it is that we need to release back into the world and what it is that we need to keep close to our chests in order to be prepared for the next stage of transitions, changes, and levelling up in our work. And we've been going through this since the kind of Plutonic transit stuff of 2020 onwards, and the fact that many of us were trapped literally in our home in this very Saturn-Pluto dynamic of, no, you will sit in the naughty corner and examine what it is that you've done with your own life, right? On a very individualistic level. Many of us are trapped inside, and we were looking at our jobs, looking at the people we have regular communications with and how meaningful that was. We were looking at whether or not we'd neglected religious practices, etc. And it was very much a case of, you can't move again until you've looked at all this and thought about what it is that you've made, and then sort of unpicked it and started to weave something for yourself which is more appropriate, not just to you, but to the collective. Because in our isolation and in our, you know, enforced loneliness, we were also starting to think more about the community, which is a good tidal thing, even if the ways that we went about that were devastating for many. And I include myself in that. You know, go back to previous readings where I talk about being trapped in a room for 2 years as a vulnerable. But there is a process sort of coming to a head at the moment, which began then. And that's true on the astrological, it's true on the tidal, it's true energetically, but it's also true politically, structurally, and in the practical senses. Many of us are tying up and finishing off work that we began during that period, even if during that period we wouldn't have consciously called it the work, because many of us have had like an awakening within that time. In fact, many of you, I'm told I'm speaking to, are now diviners, now tarot readers, now witches, in a way that you weren't then, because you're kind of coming to this. And you know, it's no coincidence to me that we've had a magical revival during that period. I mean, to a lesser extent, we had one in 2016, and then the big one was in the 90s, obviously, and then before that it was sort of in early 20th century and Theosophy movement and all the rest of it. But each time this stuff happens, it tends to be because large amounts of people are working their shit out, right? And that is broadly what I'm speaking to, and also what this guy was speaking to that I referred to that gave this message earlier. So yeah, the first kind of wisdom to take for this is if it's not a fuck yes, it's a no. And that's from my own work, but as I say, those are not my words. If I remember whose words they are, I'll link it below, but honestly, I can't remember at this time. I've read that many books in the last 2 weeks, guys. It's been very intense time of magically purging and swatting up on how it is that I'm going to practically go forward, particularly under this doomsday-ish umbrella. And some of my antidote to that actually has been watching documentaries and reading books about theme parks and Disney and Imagineers and artifice, and how the construction of the magical for the benefit of other people in expanding their own imaginations and their own joy and their own bliss was orchestrated by people sort of mid-20th century to now. And I find that really interesting, no matter what you think of Disney himself and his politics and the politics of that corporate entity as it stands today. I think also, I'm pulled to say that because many of you also are looking at things like constructs of places that are in part an artifice, special effects, film work. You're looking at how things are made, how things are done, not just in a technical engineering sense, but in the sense of constructing something practical which is of the magical, or which disseminates magical thinking or creative ways to view things, or an idea of the imposition of, the realm of the good folk, etc., onto reality, so that reality becomes unreality. You may have been looking into the liminal, and I promise you I will get to that yellow spectral reading, and we will do the back rooms soon. But I think for many of you, if you've been thinking about any of those issues very broadly and sort of ruminating on them, this is also your confirmation to say that is also tidally happening. People are looking into how it is that they can use practical mechanisms to disseminate the idea of the sublime. And I use that word specifically. So that might be something that you've been reading up on or watching or whatever. And I know also some of you are Robert Greene fans, as I am, and he is writing a book on the sublime, so that should be interesting. But yeah, so really there's a pull to eject out the airlock anything that is not for your highest benefit, the highest benefit of all those around you, and is not in line with the character, with the person that you saw yourself becoming in the spiritual sense over the next 5 to 10 years. If indeed you have that amount of time, and I'm on a time limit too, so I'm not trying to be ableist when I say those things. But simultaneous to that, there is also, in the purging, there is a rebuilding or an initial construction of a kind of magical sanctuary. And some of you are doing that in vision work and on the realm of the astral, and others of you are doing it in terms of looking into places like theme parks, things like movies, into how you can bring what it is that you artistically understand to be, aesthetically reflective of the divine, into a grounded place where other people who are coming from the material, coming from the corporate, coming from social media competition climates, they can enjoy it too, and they can subliminally receive the fact that it's not from here and sort of metaphorically turn their coats inside out, or metaphorically step into that ring, right? I'm speaking semi-cryptically because for some of you this will hit harder than others, and I feel pulled to just pull this down here, because as I'm talking about creating magical spaces materially and otherwise, I don't know whether you can see, but this is putting rainbows into these horns just here of Aries, which is the sort of grand initiator astrologically. Aries is the beginning force, the ultimate cardinal energy. It's the child of the zodiac. It's the newborn baby that says, hey, let's begin the spiritual work. And indeed, Aryan time periods often fall over things like Easter. So again, a reference back to the Christian, to the Sun King kind of bits of paganism. It's all linked, my dudes, but there's rainbows here, 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 and here. I hope you can see them on camera. I don't really know. Okay, so we're purging all that which is not relevant. We're also constructing magical spaces, magical places, inner sanctuaries, perhaps meditation spots that we return to, etc. Some of us are using rainbows in that process. Some of those are from the Rainbow Collective. Hello, same. Take it as you see fit. General transmission for a large audience. Now, with that background of what's going on, the sort of more relevant bit of what the guy was saying that I want to non-denominationally neutralise into something we can all use is to say that he was calling people to do the work in what was very much his paradigm of give me money, sign up for my course, watch my movie, and become 50-50 messenger of God / hateful Christian like I'm doing. And obviously I wouldn't call anybody to do that or follow that life because of everything I've talked about up to now. What I will give you is the equivalent from my perspective. Rainbows on the hands now. The main thing I was told to tell you, and I don't know whether it will come up in the cards, is that if you are not in a practice of daily meditation, receiving and acting on what you receive, then you're stumbling on this to learn to do the work, or to be called to do the work. I love you. It is not okay, my dudes, to be watching 2, 3, 5, 10 tarot readings a week. Maybe more, but if it's more, you possibly have a problem. Go to Chromecast if you do. It's not all right to be receiving those things, but not doing some kind of private practice. Now, why do I say it's not all right? I'm not speaking morally. I'm not even speaking to the exchange of give-receive that is in one of the systems I'll talk about in a minute. All of those things are true. But what I mean more accurately is, we know in terms of the stuff I've just been politically discussing, and the forecast, if you will, that there is a lot of disinformation floating around right now, including the very idea that things are fact-checked by those in the know and found to be wrong, when those in the know are some of the spreaders of disinformation. And I won't say more than that. The reason that you need private practice is not just to find your purpose. So if you already know your purpose, you're not exempt. It's not just to give back what you receive from readings like this on the internet, although I would urge you to do that energetically in some form, whether it's charity or helping people out or offering food to the animals in your area, whatever it is, right? It is also that in this community, and as spoken about in adjacent communities, there is a tide of disinformation at the moment. And unless you have personal practice to develop discernment of what feels like spiritual information versus what is actually hypnosis, sigillic practice used against you in terms of the corporate world, and or other forms of kind of mind control stuff, including fear-based paradigms, if you can't see that stuff coming, you're going to be just as vulnerable to it as the people who haven't had the awakening that you define yourself as having had, right? So yeah, you could have had ascension symptoms. Yes, you could have had major life changes. Yes, you could have been doing this work of expunging and creating that we've just talked about. And you could indeed be doing it under any variety of religious or spiritual practices, which have affirmed to you that you're doing it because of a higher calling and a positioning within the spiritual mission, if you like, that is, you know, very lofty and good for you. All of that can be true, and you can still be a sucker for this stuff that's coming in. And I don't want to spread fear again when I say this, but this reading is kind of a warning, okay? Now, the phrase that I was given is call and response. So the two components of that, right? The call bit, you sit down, you have a meditation practice of sorts, whether that's writing down your dreams and your dream states and sort of discerning what they are, or whether that's active meditation where you're sat and you're receiving and you're having, you know, visions, taste, touch, smell, etc., etc., or just an intentional synchronistic kind of a derive where you say, I don't feel 100% comfortable with meditation, I have a bit too much of a monkey mind, or I'm not quite there yet, but I know that there is urgent information that I need to receive, and I need to get into the habit of what it feels like to receive it directly instead of from someone who's a stranger on the internet. So I'm going to set the intention, or indeed say the prayer, that everything in my 10-minute walk from this place to this place is going to feed back to me stuff that I need to know. And then during that process, as you would in meditation, you are aware ambiently of your surroundings. You're aware of sensations in your body. You're aware of the energy moving around you. You're aware of sounds that suddenly crop up, animals that cross your path, words that people are saying that hit you as snatches of conversation. You can do this work anywhere. There is no excuse not to do it, right? If you can't carve out time to meditate, because you're listening to this on a drive or something and you're going back to a cheaper by the dozen household and 50 jobs, fine. I'm really super happy to have you, thank you. But you can do a form of this even if it's not sitting on your ass for an hour waiting for what comes. And for those who have that time, by the way, to sit on your ass for an hour in complete silence and just observe what comes up in your body and what you are thinking and feeling and ruminating on and what memories you're having, do that, right? It's one of the easiest ways to get down to the deep, deep work of yourself and where your assumptions come from and where your beliefs about life are holding you back. It really does come to you if you sit for long enough. But for those who can't sit, there is no excuse not to say, in this portion of my lunch hour, from this time to this time, I pray or I intend that everything feeding back to me is feedback, that everything is a transmission. For those of you who are from the art world, you have delineated a gallery space that changes the context of everything that appears in that room. It is now art, right? And in the same way, between this time and this time, this is now divine word. For those of you who don't come from that, but you're kind of aware of synchronicity as a concept, Jungian ideas, you're just setting a time aside that synchronicity is amplified, that you have turned up the loudspeaker of what it is that needs to be feeding back to you. Now, that's call. And again, you don't have to be able to meditate. It's useful if you can. And it's wonderful if you can drop into kind of, what do they call it? I know it's not a positive thing in the movie Get Out, but it's a really good visual analogy. The sunken place. If you can't drop into the sunken place and receive visions and stuff, fine, but that's ideal, right? But all of that, whatever you do, whether it's between the hours of 9 and 9:15, I'm going to get messages, or whether it's a full hour spent in like visual craziness, that's call. The bit most of you are missing is response. Now, what do I mean by response? For the same time period that you set aside for call, so an hour if it was an hour, 2 minutes if it was 2 minutes, either will work, by the way, but if you've got longer, I would invite you to use longer because it's going to get you kind of brownie points in that sense, right? To the extent that anyone has them. Response time is not just noting down what you observed in call, it's acting on it. A note on the writing down before I forget. So if you do have really vivid dreams, or you do work in your dreams spiritually, or you're getting just crazy stuff happening to you at night, and you feel like the amount of time it takes to puzzle that out and write it down in the morning is too long because that's not your natural thing, or because you don't write very fast or whatever, make a voice note of it, right? Send it to yourself through a non-corporate owned app like Signal, for instance. Not sponsored, they're just good. Send yourself a voice recording of each time. Have some kind of magical diary, spiritual diary, diary of events that you pick up on. It doesn't matter whether they seem significant. This is the bit I want to really emphasize for anyone new to this. If you see 3 little birds having a particular dialogue and something weird happens there and you can't decode it, and you don't decode it for 6 months, you still need to have written it down, because in 9 months, in 12 months, it could mean the world to decoding what's happened to you. It's really important to keep records of this stuff, okay? So whether you do that through speaking or writing or some other form, that is part of your response. But the main bit of the response is the stuff you can understand immediately, you take some kind of action on in that designated time. So, for example, you were directed to go home after your little walk and open a book to a certain page, and the first line that you read, you notice that 2 of the words in that line are part of the name of a local restaurant. So you make sure that on your route to wherever, you walk past that restaurant. And as you do, because the synchronicity is amplified outside of the event in ripples, you might run into somebody that you haven't seen in a long time, or you might hear a snatch of conversation again which is relevant, or something like that. If there is absolutely nothing from the call component that you can put into response, into action, what I would say is your response requirement at that point is to note it down and to think about it, just to have it turning over in your mind, in your soul, in your spirit, to set the intention, to set the prayer that you understand this at a later time. And then you can get on with your day. But I think for many of you, you're missing the step of, oh, lovely divine revelation, or oh, lovely intense vivid dream, or oh, lovely really intense memory of somebody that's passed over in meditation. I bet that was then turning up. And then you're kind of doing nothing with it. For some of you, you're not even writing it down. What's being asked of me is to say to you how important it is that you include this second part of that process. And you not only note all of this stuff down, but you act on it with immediacy. And if that's to say, thank you, great Auntie Margaret, for sending your perfume while I was meditating and for turning up in some way. I don't fully understand this yet, but I appreciate you. That's your response component. If it's to say, right, I'm going to go to that restaurant that was in the words of the book that I was directed to open. That's it, right? It can be straightforward. It can be not straightforward. If you have an animal encounter, it might be looking up what that animal means totemically, folklorically. Try to treat it as that and not monitoring spirits if you believe the divine moves through everything, yeah? Because we don't want fear-based paradigms. Look into how that animal too was holy. Just a side note. But you're kind of doing that, and then maybe you're going by the same spot that you saw it and leaving some food out, whether or not it's still there, yeah? There needs to be an answer to the question posed in your personal time, and that's because, drumroll big reveal, with what I said earlier about getting to know what is legitimate spiritual information and what is stuff that you're being persuaded by from a shadow place, from a fear-based response, from religious indoctrinations in childhood, from political indoctrinations in your part of the world, etc. In order to find out what feels true versus what's happening in that kind of a way, you need to be receiving a lot of these messages for yourself, without anybody else's help, without me, without anyone doing this online. I kind of want my audience to not need me, right? My ideal goal for this channel is that people come because there is love, because they love me, because they love my way of communicating, because they love God broadly. And because they're interested in what extra tidbits they can get from someone else's perspective, not because they are without their own guidance systems or without their own ways of tapping in, or indeed their own methods of divination. I want to be a luxury for people that they, yes, energetically offer money back for so that I can live, but that really they don't require, because they are themselves doing the work and they are themselves being sustained by spirit in a material sense, right? And in order for that to happen, you guys have to be checking in every day. And if that feels overwhelming to you, examine why it is that you feel separate from something that you believe is running through everything. Were you taught as a kid that you needed a mediator to the divine? Which may be why I'm speaking to Christians right now, right? Because I can tell you now that if you believe in something like the Holy Spirit, there is no middleman required, okay? There is just intention, prayer, protection over what you do. For many of you, you don't tap in because you feel fear, because you've come from religions or horror movies that have demonized the sort of aesthetics of folk practice, right? I'm a big horror fan, and I've spoken about this on the channel before, but the vast majority of horror movies, whenever they deal with the spirit world, the demonic, anything like that, they use symbols from indigenous folk practice around the world that taps into the light. And they make those symbols appear evil through constant reinforcement of those same images, right? So if some of this rubs you up the wrong way because you feel you're opening up to something that could, hack into you in some way and possess you, or if you feel an aversion to things like the pagan because of the imagery used and the fact you've seen that in places with horrible narratives, it's time to get rid of that and examine it and pull it apart and look at how it intersperses with things like colonialism and who it benefits, right? Follow the money. And to really, if you feel inhibited from your own practice because it's like, well, if I open the doors, what will I let in? Then I would urge you to go within your own paradigm, within your own belief system, and find their methods of protection and structure that into this call time, right? Where before you sit down, you're saying a prayer to the Archangel Michael, or before you sit down, you are doing salt cleansing, or before you sit down, you're lighting incense and calling in spirits of the things that you work with. Just so that door can be opened safely and you feel protected and you're visualizing yourself in kind of an armor of light, in order that you know that anything coming in is a clear transmission. There is no one else on the line, right? And the more that you do that, the better the world gets. This is a big deal. The big material changes are happening because, in the same way as with the pandemic making us examine where it is we'd put ourselves and our lives, this stuff is the only way to snap some people out of it. And the best way to collectively get loads of people protected against calamity, broadly, is to make sure that the maximum number of us are doing the work and are tapping in every day and receiving messages and receiving the feeling of what messages are like, so that we can discern what information is coming into us that is false or doesn't feel right, so that we can protect those around us who are not doing this. Because many of us also come from backgrounds where our friends, our families, etc. are not tapped into this current, nor do they want to be. And that's fine, and that's their journey, and it's not for us to intervene, actually. But what we can do is protect them by having our own hunches and acting on them, even if we're not saying that we're acting on a hunch. If we can see that the wave is coming and get to higher ground, it doesn't matter whether they believe that the wave is coming. Do you see what I'm getting at? And the reason I say the response needs to happen with the call is that the more you respond directly to the information that's being received, the more information will be sent your way. Because there is an understanding from the flow of things that sends that information that you are absolutely willing to be an agent of it and to do good in the world with it. There is an extent to which transmissions will not be sent to a deadline or something that's not picking up at the other end. And if some of you are in a period of blockage right now, having been someone who did divination, etc., then I would urge you to look at the extent to which you were responding to the calls that you received. And that's not to penalise, to demonise, to accuse, because I've been there too, right? I've been locked out of magic for years at a time in various periods because I had to be shook awake in different ways, in more material ways, in order to be responsive to the things that I was receiving and eventually form this channel. So there needs to be call and there needs to be response. And these needs to be daily practices that are always linked to each other, right? And if you don't know what it is you believe or you're dealing with, perfect. Even more of a reason to ask, right? Feeling like you don't know as much as the next person isn't a reason not to go to class. It's a reason to turn up and be vigilant and really make sure that you're on time and you've brought all your notes. If you don't know what it is you're dealing with, or what you believe about what's coming, or what you believe is working through people like me, or is coming through in your dreams, or whatever it is, this this whole thing, this whole speech that I'm doing is to tell you specifically to sit with it every day and then to act on it. Okay? Right. That's part one. I want to do a reading from the Gospel of Josephine McCarthy, who I hope won't mind that I'm taking a bit out of Quareia for this. I did a bit of bibliomancy before I set up for this, knowing that there was something that I didn't have the words for but needed to be said. And I'm pulling from Quareia the Apprentice. Side note, if you know that you're of a witchcraft/magician type thing, but none of the sort of pagan paths presented to you have been fully satisfying to you, or there's just something missing from the schools of thought that you've looked at, whether they be hermetic, ceremonial, or more traditional, whatever, look into Quareia, because all of the information is free. It's translated into several global languages, and you can get it as PDFs if you can't afford the books. It is just like an open source school of magic, and it's the first of its kind, and I love it. Again, not sponsored. There is no sponsorship. It doesn't make money other than to sustain itself, but it is a full, comprehensive, complete system. It includes divination, it includes archangelic work, it includes cross-cultural, a-religious examinations of different indigenous mechanisms to tapping into this stuff that we're talking about. And it is fucking powerful, and it has changed my life and the lives of some of the people that I'm close with. So, side note, if you're not into Quareia, get on it. I'll link it down below. That's the book that you need first. So I opened it this morning, just going to move this tourmaline, onto the Laws of Fate, which is kind of apt for a tarot channel, right? Although I don't believe in a deterministic universe, if you're curious. And the bit that I want to hone in on is just here. So I'm going to read it aloud in case you can't see stuff here. But I want you to just absorb it and listen to it and see whether anything specifically that's confirmation for you pops out, and hit me up in the comments if it does. So she says, before we look at those dynamics, let's first look briefly at the issues of cultural overlay that act as such stumbling blocks for magicians, read broadly, spiritual practitioners. The first is what I call the Disney sentimentality. This is a nice but heavily unbalanced way of viewing the world that has no real bearing on how the world works. It's amplified by New Age sentiment and ends up twisting our understanding of a deep, enduring power dynamic that runs through every living thing. The first thing is that nature is not cute. It is not cute simply because everything in nature fights to survive and fights for resources. When a being, a human, an animal, or a plant, is well resourced, the deeper qualities of sharing, caring, patience, and communion surface in many but not all beings. There seems to be a disconnect in our modern thinking. We think such qualities come from being a good person, when in fact they come from being a well-resourced being, barring mental illness or mental disorder. A lot of destructive behaviour comes from being under-resourced, be it food, shelter, community, education, or expression. I know this is simplifying the situation, but I don't want to have to write a whole book, which is what it would take, to outline the complexity of the issue. So the issue of being under-resourced should be something in the forefront of a magician's mind when he or she comes to work on a magical project that involves the fate or behaviour of an individual. The other mistake that is often made in issues of fate is that if the magician means well, then all will be well. More damage can be done to a fate pattern by being nice than by being relevant. Sometimes pain, destruction, being under-resourced, etc. is what is needed for a situation to move forward in a balanced way. Good or bad can balance the scales, and the magician needs to know what is needed and when. Now you can begin to see the complexity. Most of this can be navigated through divination and inner sight. Another main issue that comes up in magic, and indeed in tarot, guys, is a misunderstanding of karma. It has become a dogma in the East and West that everything is locked down in fate and you can do nothing to change your lot. It is your karma. That is total bullshit. Her words, not mine. There are indeed tides of cause and effect that do run through fate, but they are not fixed. They flow and ebb according to how you act and react, the choices you make, and the choices of those around you. You are, for the most part, in the driver's seat of your own fate, with the inner powers of fate sometimes taking over the wheel at important spots in the road. It's a joint effort. As I was saying earlier, this work that we're all doing is collaborative. The more you engage in it in both components, the more that it will engage with you as a good student. Good being a problematic word, but you get what I'm putting out with that, right? I think it's really interesting what she said there about under-resourced beings. And I've seen that personally play out in terms of just interactions with nature from where I live at the moment. But also it's a bigger understanding to have as we go forward into potentially tumultuous times in the way that they were again in 2020, right? And I don't believe that the larger overarching forces giving misinformation at this time are under-resourced in any fashion. But what I do believe is that they sometimes take advantage of the under-resourced in other ways and sort of allocate them as emissaries or as spokespeople. And this is partly why I came from the beginning of this transmission and talking about the video from that guy, because I think that for somebody to be in a paradigm that includes religious hatred, even as it includes love thy neighbour, one has to be under-resourced to hold both those truths in mind and believe them equally. So some of it is like for some of you who have got the work of religious unpicking and childhood belief system unpicking to do, this is your call to say that some of the path to that, I don't want to say forgiveness necessarily, but the reconciliation of that thing is to understand those individuals as being under-resourced in some way in order to believe what they did, perpetuate what they did, call you what they did. Indeed, yesterday I was having a conversation with a wonderful, magically inclined friend of mine who was talking about their particular demonization from certain groups in childhood. And we were kind of exchanging impressive tales of, you know, having different priests tell us that we were abominations at different stages for fairly innocent behaviours, etc., etc., because of the fact that those individuals were spiritually under-resourced, or that they had come from backgrounds themselves which carried damage or carried messaging which does not benefit everybody. For those who've been doing family healing, and I know that's a lot of you, you know, breaking of ancestral curses, in inverted commas, patterns, healing narcissisms, etc. I'm with you there. I've been doing some of that myself and sort of unlocking abundance through doing that work. You've done very well there. And now I want you to apply those same principles more broadly to how are people that you're not even blood related to and didn't grow up around also under-resourced enough that they will do catastrophic damage to other humans, right? And I'm seeing a magpie sat outside my window as I'm talking about this. And I work with magpie quite a lot. I really love it as a symbol, actually, or as a, not a symbol, as a messenger, sorry. That's not really respectful enough. Hello, Mr. Magpie. But again, it's a black and white being that talks about things not being black and white, that talks about trickster paradigms, being betwixt things, liminality, crossroads even, and I say that in a tentative sense because of the audience here. But the sort of the point where one perspective meets another perspective and forms one of these, right? And I think that some of that skill set is required in the healing of not people who are orchestrating this at high levels, because I'm not going to go into what I believe on that, and I'm not going to expect you to, because frankly I don't want to get banned. But at a lower, sort of more grunt level, at the level of operation, if you like, at our level, on the practical and in our communities, to what extent is the perpetuation of untruths coming about because people are under-resourced, and to what extent can we non-threateningly, non-frighteningly offer our own resources to fill that gap so that those people come to their own realizations about, oh fuck, I don't need to hurt another person to do this. I don't need to attack an entire religious group to spread the word of God. I don't need to threaten living people to cast out psychological demons or entities that are a bit parasitic in my environment. Sarah Sanderson agrees with this one. And indeed, she is, you know, healing has happened here, right? This paint, if you're not a regular subscriber, was all the way down to her root, and I rescued her, and here she is, doing fabulously. Thank you for your thoughts and prayers on her from when I asked, but it's this thing of like, they were painted with this purple paint. Purple is spirituality to me, right? They were painted with the spirituality of a certain structure in order that their expression could only manifest through those rules, through those dogmas, through those, in some cases, incitings of religious hatred, particularly online. Please report where you see that. And now they are growing out to receive more sunlight, to receive more light, truth, informational downloads, etc., to the point where they are outgrowing that paint altogether, right? And I know I shouldn't touch, but I was given permission just there. So I think there's something there to helping your enemy flourish, which again is actually where Christianity was coming from at one point, right? And saying in what ways the under-resourced nature of this particular individual and their childhood and their ancestral pattern and the environment that led to their fervent religiosity, in what way is that something that I can speak? Sorry guys, we had a slight interruption there. In what way is that something I can speak to in a way that nourishes them, in a way that fills them up, right? And that really is kind of turning, well, it's not even turning the other cheek, because that sounds very sacrificial, but it's praying for those who persecute you. Ironic, no? Right, let's go in with some of these bad boys, because I know that's what many of you are here for. I will make it quick, because I know I've rambled on for a long time. And feel free to put your timestamp in the comments and come back in instalments. If you're not ready for a reading right now and you just want to absorb the channeled stuff that I've said, that's absolutely fine. But we're going to get some from the Vertigo, some from the Labyrinth Dark Crystal Jim Henson Mega Deck, and some from the Fallen Angels Oracle card, just because we are talking about Judeo-Christian paradigms and ideas today. Although that's not the only peoples that I'm speaking to, and again, without speaking too specifically on global events, there are other people operating at the moment from a place of needing their cup to be filled, right? And some of that is leading to a certain genocide happening. But again, not looking to get that. Let's have you, shall we? And you want to come? Is it you or is it you? No, it's you. Is anyone else up for it? Two more? Yeah? Right. Excuse me. Oh, excuse you, sorry. There we go. That'll be that one then. Cheers, lads. Okay, so in terms of tarot, we have a magician to begin with. How apt, no? Three of Pentacles, so that collaborative effort is strong with this one. Death in the middle, don't panic if you're new to tarot. It just means the ending of a cycle and the beginning of another. Nine of Wands, a Hierophant, that's interesting when we're talking about dogmas. A Ace of Pentacles and a Four of Cups. I want to go in with, I think we need three angels and then some of these as well. Let's get the angels first because of the layout. Fallen Angel Oracle cards, thank you kindly. And one for the right hand. And one who is neither, thank you. I wanted one, actually. I feel it's this one, but exhaustion is something that the guy said in the prophetic word that I received via YouTube algo. One of the ways that he hooked me in was talking about a certain exhaustion and sleeplessness that many of us have been experiencing recently. And there were lots of confirmations in the comments that that is indeed happening. That is an ascension symptom in the more sort of new age terminology. But you may also have been in this state of, I can't fully sleep, but I'm tired all the time. You may be like me, where you've been checking things like your iron levels, your vitamin D levels, wondering why there are constant bags under your eyes, wondering why your cognition is not flowing as readily as it should. And I mean, check me out now, right? That's not a problem once I'm delivering the message. So that shows you it's something to do with being outside of that. But many of you are also feeling exhausted. I'm not a doctor, so if those symptoms are happening, yes, do get checked out by someone qualified. I'm not saying to shun medical advice because I'm not a medical practitioner. But what I am saying is many of us are going through this thing of feeling just utterly drained, like there's a serious problem going on at the moment. And for many already on the spiritual path, that is an ascension symptom. It is part of what's going on astrologically, spiritually, tidally, right? So I think that speaks to that. But then these are the main bad boys. So we've got health fast and respite, bathing and travel. And then we've got Erebus and honesty. That's interesting. So honesty speaks to this idea that like you need to be the discernment mechanism of the messages that you're receiving, including from tarot channels, right? Because it's happening from all sides at the moment. There's a lot of misappropriation of terms, like that term karma that we explored there, like the term karmic, which I hate and don't really use on this channel in that context because it's vastly appropriative as well as inaccurate. But you know, look to the words people are using, look to the vibe you're getting from readings, whether it makes you feel better for having it, whether it makes you feel empowered to listen to, etc., etc. These are all relevant things. Goblin King, wherever you may be, what's the information pertinent to me? Nearly. One more. I'm not taking all of those. Interesting though that we have the Skeksis Emperor, who I believe looks like a certain politician who may or may not rise to power again. Sorry. It's not the... Yeah, it's the Skeksis Emperor, but it's the King of Wands. So this is some kind of impulsivity and power games and sort of forcing of hands in different places, and that's as much as I'll say without wanting to get sued. But that may be relevant for your part of the world, or the idea of a fixed election with that emperor, because remember that like there was the death of the emperor and then the trial by stone bit in the Dark Crystal. There's a lot of kind of competition and fixedness, and one person being no better than the other in that particular trial before the whole thing comes to be healed at the end of the movie, right? So if you're feeling, for example, and this is just a hypothetical, that certain politicians in your country at the time of viewing this are as bad as each other and you are despairing for the future, then what I would say is that bear in mind that the whole of the way that system operates is going to actually be the thing to be brought to light, to be brought to good, in the sense of Jen healing the crystal at the end of the movie and the way that kind of works. I'm being asked to take one more, which is the Four of Swords. People of similar minds, similar levels of greed, speaking to each other. And the Four of Swords is about rest. It's about sleep. It's about disrupting sleep. Again, not going to speak too much on agendas, etc., but some of you can pick up what I've put down. Okay, so we've got a Seven of Cups, an Eight of Swords, a Five of Pentacles, an Ace of Cups, and a Five of Cups in these cards. And we also have an equal spread of labyrinth and dark crystal pretty much because of what I just picked up. But we have Kira, we have Sarah, we have Toby, we have the Skeksis Emperor, we have the mechanism of the labyrinth itself, and then we have Toby again. So that may be relevant to some of you who understand what those characters mean, do, and are signified by some. Okay. Respite. Respite is different to rest. This adds up to a 7, so particularly my Cancerians, I'm speaking to you. If you have found it difficult to sleep, what you are being called to do instead is seek respite, seek sanctuary in that way that we talked about, building sacred space, sacred places. You are being asked to make a physical or a mental safe space in which to lay, and I really mean lay, I want you to starfish on this, when you feel that you can't rest physically or that your sleep is disrupted or whatever it is. You need to have a sacred and safe space to return to. And again, we talked about looking into the protection mechanisms for your particular religious paradigm, examining what they are and cleansing a space using them. What I'm also being pulled to say is that for those of you who are doing that space clearing process, hiccups confirmation. For those who are doing that space clearing process in the material sense, in the sort of KonMari getting rid of objects way, or who are minimising, downsizing in order to move forward in a very practical fashion, or to be mobile when this kicks off, make your respite centre, your place of rest, into the room that is already done, right? I know KonMari does things by category. For spiritual purposes, throw that out the window for right now. Make sure that you have a bedroom, a kitchen cupboard, whatever the fuck it is, that is clear of anything that is not absolutely needed for where you're going to go, and make that the place that you go to with your cleansing and clearing mechanisms to rest from whatever it is that's been attacking your sleep, your physical body, that's been sort of weighing down on you or preventing you from receiving these spiritual messages in the same way. Indeed, that place of respite may be where you take your call part in order to do the response in the wider world. And I say do response in the broader world, partly because you need to build up that energy in your sacred space and your sanctuary space, whether that's even just within you, and carry it as the magician would carry his torch here into the broader environment. Right? It's not enough to sanctify and ward and to have a cupboard where you go and then to open the door onto the wider world, and it's like an inverse of the Wizard of Oz, and there's, grenades popping off and people running past attacking each other and cars turning over and all the rest of it. It reminds me of I think it's in Wayne's World 2, where he opens the door onto like an action movie and there's all these guns going off, and then he just kind of closes the door and it's all quiet again. Lovely. It's a bit like that idea, right? That you may cultivate this sacred space, even if it's a non-material kind of astral space, and you may ward it and guard it, and then it feels like you're opening the door onto this absolute chaos. But your job at this point, even if you don't feel very in touch with stuff, is to take the energy that you cultivated in that space and carry it into this place of chaos, carry it into the wider world, be a beacon for other people, right? And to not fear that in carrying that light, that you will be a beacon for the dark, because that's another kind of very dangerous paradigm that we've been taught largely by horror movies. To some extent, with higher magical work and when you're dealing with bigger things, that stuff becomes true. But once you hit that point where it is true and where parasites kind of come for you because you're sending out good stuff, you will have already been in a training system like Quareia, where you have prepared yourself for those kind of onslaughts. And at a much more kind of grunt level that we're talking about here, you shining your light is not going to invite the dark. And I really want you to challenge that, question that, exhume that, banish it from your reality, cleanse your environment of it, smoke it out, right? Salt and burn. Because it's going to be increasingly important that you come away from your personal practice carrying the light, spreading your wings, boosting your halo, boosting your personal auric field, doing things like LBRP if that resonates with you, and shining brightly for others. Because on some subliminal level, even if they have nothing in common with you belief-wise, it's going to boost their faith enough that they too are warded against, I don't want to say the dark, but against very difficult times. Because this isn't about a fight against evil. We're not warriors against the adversary here, guys. We're just conscious that the tides moving through the planet at the moment are destructive tides, and in order to navigate a destructive tide, sometimes what you need to be is both destructive in terms of getting rid of the extraneous, and constructive in terms of shining a beacon for other people and making sure that you're in receipt of divine messaging and that you're on your own path, you're following signals from what you believe in, and that you're doing the best you can for everyone around you, right? So that's what that speaks to. I think it's obvious as to why it links up with the magician, but I should also say that with Mercury here, and with the fact that the magician is this powerful magical worker, there is a calling for you to come into your own in that sense. So if you don't identify as a healer in the broader sense, or as like a magical vocational person, know that you getting in touch with your own ideas of divinity is that same work and is your way of healing the world. And perhaps when I spoke to creating magical sanctuary in physically mechanistic ways, for some of you that's the calling, for some of you that's where you're the magician. The magician also is a very powerful being. He's somebody who has all the material resources he needs, all of the sort of intellectual components to structure that into something like a ride, right? Which is why Disney references throughout. And I think even if you're a super practical, super grounded person, you're going to use those practical skills together with your awareness in a way that kind of hasn't been done. And in that sense, you might be a healer. It doesn't mean you're putting on your hands to a person or doing any of that kind of stuff, but it means that the stuff you're putting out into the world is for the benefit of everybody and for the awakening of everybody, right? So that can be really important to understand, that like you doing you in a way that's constantly in touch with your own spirituality on a daily basis is just as valuable for the collective as quote unquote magical or spiritual work. And you need to be cognizant of that moving forward. Kira here usually signifies the querent for me, or the person listening, if you're new to tarot. She looks a lot like my child self, right? I was this gawky blonde kid with a prominent lower projection in my face and a big fringe. I was very much Kira as a little girl, and I used to come out with weird shit like she does and sing a lot like she does and tell stories and all the rest of it. And I was a girly girl, although that changed over time. But, there's a lot of stuff there that sort of points to me and my inner child. So what I want to say with Toby coming up twice as well is that if you're not doing inner child work, or you're not looking at the messages you received about spirituality as a very young kid, now is the time, right? Because this is inner child for me is inner child for you, because I'm relaying. With it being her sort of looking towards the magician's path, looking towards respite, and with it being a 7 of Cups, which is about an abundance of choices or dreams or fantasy realms, again, this is re-emphasising that the work to be done here is to look into the messaging received through those kinds of areas and to really ground it into that response thing as well as the call. You may be in the 7 of Cups mode where you're getting the downloads, you're getting the information, you're receiving readings that confirm stuff has happened for you. But I feel that if you're viewing this reading and if you've come this far, and thank you, I love you, The problem is that you're not really grounding that into a particular reality yet, which is where we get to the 3 and the Ace of Pentacles. Ace is the most pentacles you can get. It's the most grounded. It's body, it's money, it's place. It's earthly things, earthly matters. For some of you, it's religious text as well, because of this writing in this particular deck. And the 3 of Pentacles speaks of a collaborative effort. With this pentacle over the mouth, it's also talking to me about the word. And with it being over the 3rd eye, it's like the divine reception turning into what is the speaking about what is true. So this is understanding other people who are speaking on spiritual truths in the way that we discussed, but it's also, let me just angle this back because some of you want to look at the coloured light. It's also kind of understanding where you are in terms of relaying the information that you receive. So if you're in the broom closet, now might be a good time to come out, right? And if that's not you, and you're around people that you don't feel are quite ready for what it is that you've been experiencing or doing, and you know that if you talked about having ascension symptoms, your spouse or your kids or your immediate friends or your family would think you were barking up the wrong tree, examine what it is that you can say. And I say that very carefully because I was around an extremely new age mother who to this day speaks in really inappropriate ways about her own beliefs, presuming that everyone around will agree with her or that they're wrong, in ways that is socially ostracizing and actually distances those people from the truths that she would like to discuss openly with them, right? In a way, how open she is with her words, and I say this with love, but it actively ostracizes her in a way that makes people less receptive to good things that she is saying, right? And to things that they would relate to. And I think there needs to be a balance here between what you can say and what you should say. So if that's that you say absolutely nothing and you've been working kind of in the dark for a while with these kinds of forces and you're ready to come out now and say, hey, I believe these things and I think it's important that I'm open about that, this is your calling to do that. But conversely, if you are hyper open, if you are using terms that people outside of your paradigm would not understand very well or be open to, or they would see as woo, or they would associate with ideas that you don't agree with, even if that's not through any fault of yours, moderate how you speak about those things. I'm actually going to produce some content on this coming up, I hope. But twin flames is one of those kinds of sets of ideas, right? And I already mentioned in this reading, I don't tend to talk about starseeds because I think we've just fucked up our own planet and it's a very convenient out. I don't tend to talk about Atlanteans, Arcturians, partly because all of these kinds of terms really distance people who are on the fence about this stuff from getting deeper into it. It's the wooification of things that are more materially true. And I think that the phrase I used earlier, barking up the wrong tree, is an interesting one in a way, because trees are very grounded. Trees are the pentacles root into the earth, into what exists already, but connecting to the heavens through the branches. Trees are a very good representation of this as above, so below kind of energy that this is illustrating as well. And I think that speaks to like grounded communication of this mercurial energy, of this messenger, right? If you in particular feel called as a messenger to relay certain things, I want you to make sure that you are as grounded as a tree, as rooted in your current circumstance, your current community, your social environment, and the the traditions and colloquialisms of it. Rooted enough in those things that you feel comfortable expressing in a way that isn't threatening to other people. Because part of why we've had to break down your own ideas of threat, etc., so far in this reading, is because you're now ready to induct by your own light, right? Eight of Swords, and we've got the bars of the bed with Toby. So this inner child is mentally trapped in something which prevents it from stepping into this protagonist role, which Sarah embodies. Sarah is the main character, and we mentioned a little about main character energy, right? And it's not just a narcissistic paradigm, it's also one of understanding that you can intend your own life into being, and that creation is collaborative, and that whilst one must have respect for those forces greater than you, there is also a process by which you are co-creating at any moment. That's main character energy in the light, right? There is something about your cultural indoctrination or your past or your childhood that is barring you from that role and keeping you in this inner child fear space that we talked about, rather than stepping into what Sarah eventually embodies by the end of the movie, when she says, "You have no power over me," and she literally takes down a world of illusion and artifice with a magical statement, right? The place that Jareth has constructed to ensnare her, the place of, for instance, media disinformation, or in a more labyrinth type way, fairy glamour, is dismantled instantaneously by her awareness that she can take back her own power, because she is co-creative as well. And the thing stopping you from entering into that role through a process of journey and initiation, like what Sarah goes through, is something to do with the past, something to do with childhood, something to do with being shushed as well, because the thing I think of with Toby is when Sarah talks about the goblins taking him away, the reason that we as an audience see that they did is that he's crying and then there's suddenly a dead silence. It's like, boom. So if you've been shushed, if you've been silenced in what felt like a violent way prior to this, that is the stuff to work on in order to step into this new role, okay? And that's something to take to your call time in order to write down the response received. And I don't mean you sit and think about it in a logical, swordsy way and you go, oh, well, that childhood issue came from this statement and it's probably that my parents experienced this in their childhood. Because that's logic brain, that's not what we're receiving here. It's instead to protect, to go into your sanctuary, to take it into meditation and say, hey, I'm aware of this thing that I feel or that I underwent as a kid. Could you enlighten me on it? I'm open to whatever you bring. And then just staying quiet and receiving, and then going to that place of writing down what you receive and acting on it, right? And it's not you deciding what happened, it's you receiving from spirit downloads, information, etc. on what happened, okay? Death, travel, and then Toby again. And Toby with the grief card as well. And being ensnared by the goblins, being trapped in that realm of illusion, in that media landscape of disinformation, of conflict, of constant noise, constant intrigue, constant competition, which the goblins represent. You may feel that your inner child at the moment is trapped in a landscape that is confusing at best, rambunctious at best, and life-threatening at worst. Right? And I think that's an accurate reflection of the global climate at the moment. But you're being asked to put a stop to any travels. You're being asked to sit in place with it and accept where you are. Again, we spoke about opening the door onto all this violence and taking the light that you bore out into that world and being a kind of emissary with it. You can't do that unless you sit in a cupboard that is in that sphere. There's also what's coming to me is The End of Time Bandits, which is a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. Fantasy movie from the 80s. But, you know, there's this high fantasy setting and all of these things going on with an adversarial element versus literal God, and a band of people that are sort of fighting a holy war, if you like, through time, using all these passageways and stuff. It's absolutely amazing. But it ends with coming back down to earth, back down to community, And this defeated adversarial element is kind of crushed by God into like a meteorite and left in someone's microwave. Their house explodes around it, and there's like a fire crew and this guy's parents coming out and all this sort of stuff. And the kid that's witnessed all this happening, the protagonist, the Sarah figure, sees his parents about to open the microwave with this like devil meteorite inside. And they reach out and he goes, "It's evil, don't touch it." And lo and behold, because they're idiots and because they're sort of very media brainwashed, etc. in that movie, they do touch it because they don't believe him and they disappear. And then this kid is left at the end of a kid's movie without any parents, without a home to go to because it's essentially blown up, having had this adventure through time, and sort of left with like, well, all that you have now is the resources of the things that we learn. And it's like a very mixed ending because it's sort of, oh God, what's he going to do now? He's on his own. But it's also like, yeah, he needed to get rid of those parents who were still under the previous dominant narrative and who would have brought him back into harm's way. You know, he needed to be, again, with this destructive tide, he needed the death of that old paradigm, the old household, his old life, and he needed to go off with the firemen and foster parents and whatever comes next in order to continue to be a warrior of God and maybe meet his friends again through time and space. Again, if you haven't seen it, I know I've spoiled the ending slightly, but please watch it because it's fantastic. But there's this sense of like, you saying maybe to people around you, and the light is coming through as I'm saying this, it's evil, don't touch it. Or like, you know, these paradigms, these belief systems, these online communities, these networks of people that claim to be anti-whatever are dangerous, don't touch it. And they're not listening, right? And I say, again, very tentatively, that some of the things that claim at the moment to be anti-evil or anti-fascist or anti-control or any of those other things themselves have agendas of the things that they are against. And if you know what to look for, you can see the markers of that in how those collectives operate. And you can sort of sense out from a spiritual paradigm, do these people, do these ideas, do these manifestos make me feel good? Whether or not they are doing good work, are they coming from a good place? And again, back to that thing we learned in Quareia of, you know, when a creature, an individual or a collective is under-resourced, underappreciated even, it will act in very chaotic, very harmful ways. And I think you're seeing that play out in some of the things around you. And you're saying to your mates, to your family, to whatever, it's evil, don't touch it. And at this point, there is sort of an understanding from spirit and with the sunlight shining on everything that, one, if they do touch it, that's part of their thing and the light is still shining, the sun is still out, right? Your work goes on regardless. But also, if, like the parents at the end of Time Bandits, they do touch it and they do disappear from your experience for a little while, or they get involved in something that you can't get involved in for safety reasons, or, you know, your warnings go unheeded or whatever, with this death card, there is like a release of like, you know what, if they're going to go that way, I can let them go now. Or I can let them walk down that path, because your job at the moment is to receive, to relay, to stay in the light, and to let anything which isn't going to do that go on its way, right? Really, this bit is saying yes, go into your sacred space in a bit of isolation, a bit of contemplation, to the extent that that's healthy. And I encourage you to still be social when I say isolation. But, you know, you're doing a bit of inner work, you're doing a bit of deep diving, shall we say. But there's also a thing here of like, if other people around you are not prepared to do similar, let them go. Let them do them. Part of your job is letting nature happen. And again, we talked about the Quareia bit about the Disneyfication of things around you. And the idea that because somebody is well-intended, their meddling in the fates of others is going to bring about positive things, and the fact that that's a fallacy. I really want you to heed that warning in your own work. Intervene to the extent that you can, but if people around you get involved with stuff that turns out to be nefarious, turns out to be corporate agenda, pharmaceutical agenda, follow the money with all of these movements that are going on, let them go, right? And I know that's hard because I'm doing the same thing with some of my friends at the moment in terms of paradigms that are actually really harmful to certain groups, and them just being totally suckered in by stuff and joining collectives that are doing real damage in the real world. But I know where my boundaries of I'm going to intervene in that end. And I think this is your call to set your own boundaries in that sense, right? To say, my work is to relay, my work is to receive and to act on, call and response. My work is to get rid of stuff in my environment that is not a fuck yes. And beyond that, do what thou wilt. Go do your thing, right? And if you are in need of me as a teacher or as a co-creator, as a crew member, you will loop back round once you've learnt a lesson about what it is, right? Because there's also when I said leader then, I felt a bit of a twinge of narcissism, messiah complex, not good, not good. There's like a fear in our group, in our sort of collective of the people doing this work, that we'll get too egoic about it, and that is a real danger. Avoid guru mentality wherever possible. We're all on the same level here. It's just we're doing it in different ways. And there needs to be awareness that somebody else's way is not yours. And there needs to be a resistance to intervene because you know better than somebody else close to you when they're going down a different path. And perhaps, again, that's why I started with conversation about religiosity, because so often conversion culture links back to really harmful shit like colonialism and indeed the purging of, for instance, accused witches, right? Whether or not they had anything to do with witchcraft. Conversion itself, it's a lovely idea, but it's led to more deaths than any other idea in any religion, right? And I would urge you, again, with this careful how you speak, if somebody wants to go in a different direction to you, morally or spiritually, okay, it's not your position to speak on that past a certain point. You can offer your opinion, but if you try and lasso them back in, you are giving them a mechanism to pull you into that world and off your path. And also, you are intervening with fate in a way that's not going to benefit anybody. And again, remember, a well-meant intervention in the fates of other people does not necessarily mean a positive result. Whew, that was heavy shit. Right. 9 of Wands. So we're feeling injured, we're feeling wounded, perhaps even physically if some of you aligned with the ascension symptom stuff. But we're also painting with a magical brush the world that we want to create. Again, Disney, creating magical realities, creating sanctuaries, creating magic for other people who are not in a magical paradigm so that they can absorb the imagery of it, the feeling of it, and perhaps connect with something within themselves. With that, alongside a 4 of Cups, it's almost like not everybody's going to pick that up where you put it down. Not everybody's going to take that offer. Not everybody's going to relate to what it is that you're creatively putting out. And I do intend to do a creativity reading pretty soon on this channel in terms of your next project. So subscribe if you're interested in that one. But there is kind of a warning for some of you in the spiritual world that you're going to make something or do something here. Whether that's a one-time thing or in several different ways. And not everyone's going to be receptive to it. And again, let it go. That's fine. Sometimes you will shout, it's evil, don't touch it, and people will go that way anyway. And that's not to say that anybody going a different way to you or not buying your products or whatever the fuck is evil. It's just to say, as an analogous thing, people will do what it is that you don't want them to do. And you need to step down egoically from the position of, well, that's unfair, or that's not right, or anything else that Sarah would say at the beginning of the movie, right? Because by the end, she knows that all she needs to say is, nothing has any power over me. And that makes her super powerful. And again, it pertains to her and her journey and her role. If you are doing good creative or spiritual work, it doesn't fucking matter whether some of the people who you would want to receive that work are actually being abusive, I dare say violent about it, although obviously if that happens, report it and deal with it as is necessary and relevant, you know. You're going to get trolls, is what I'm saying. Whatever you do, and whether those people are trolling against the religiosity or spirituality or magical childlike nature of what it is that you're putting out, or whether they're just being trolls because that's the way they are, you're going to get people resisting what it is that you're inspired to put out after this process of call response for a while. Pay them no mind, right? Keep doing it. It's either your job or it isn't. And I don't think that you should rely upon the appreciation and approval of other people in order to put out work which is appropriate, right? I mean, I'm speaking from a channel which has less than 40 subscribers at the time of filming, knowing that I'm putting out stuff that I believe in, right? And that it will find its audience when it needs to. And again, subscribe and spread around if you think you're that audience. Help me out, right? But you're either doing what you're meant to be doing and passionate about it and doing it whether or not you see results, or you're doing what it is that gets hits, that gets appropriate responses from other people, that gets, you know, bigger results in the wider world, and therefore you're bowing to the paradigms, to the structures, to the approval of the wider world and the wider world's level of appreciation or development. If you don't agree with the collective narratives going on right now, why are you trying to fit in with the collective's approval? Part of the witch wound, excuse me, hiccups, confirmation. Part of the witch wound, or of identifying as a magician, as a spiritual practitioner, as a healer in the broad sense, is being completely fucking unafraid to do stuff that other people won't like. Because you are not part of society in the same way. You're not above it, right? You're not a guru. But your house might be on the edge of the community by the woods. Do you see what I mean? And indeed, like, going back to, again, he's very politically problematic and I understand that, but going back to Disney being a big influence recently and coming up in that Quareia text, Walt Disney didn't give a shit, right? He's inspiring to so many people from a business perspective, aside from anything else, because in creating this kind of magical universe through films and through the parks, he really couldn't care what anyone else was doing, or whether people believed he could do it, or whether they liked it. And he was very vigilant in the language that he used with the people he worked with, about sort of never shooting down ideas, and always saying, instead of, that's horse shit, it's not going to work. You know, people say that he would say things like, let's think about doing this a different way, right? He absolutely upheld, whether or not you find him problematic, he absolutely upheld his own principles around how he was going to use his sacred word, how he was going to act in the world, what he would tolerate from other people in terms of them cheering on his ideas or being collaborative, right? Three of Pentacles again. He only took on people who would work with him and who would believe in what it was that he was doing, because he felt that what he was doing was his purpose. And again, his legacy fucking speaks to that being correct, am I right? Like, it's difficult to think of a more world-changing figure in that century, in some ways, in terms of the repercussions up until even now. Culturally, in terms of ideas, in terms of paradigms, all of it, in terms of engineering and pioneering stuff. he had a very set idea that he was doing the correct thing. And I want you to be as vigilant with your own creativity and to say, if I know that what I'm putting out is correct, it doesn't matter whether other people would say, oh, I'd rather have a love reading about a nasty karmic. And it doesn't matter whether other people would say, I'd prefer your paintings if they were a bit less dark. And it doesn't matter if other people will say, I see what you're putting out there, but I believe that spirituality has to be about the Most High or it's not true. Those are just examples. They may resonate personally with some of you, but really this is about sticking by your own principles, deciding through call and response what your value system is, and not compromising on it anymore. Because honestly, if anything can be said about the dominant narrative that comes from the idea of it being nefarious or adversarial or wanting to do damage to certain people or wanting to block us or hold us back, the best way to fight that is to be sure of who you are and to stay that way in the face of whatever it is, whatever comes, however much sleep you can get, however physically you feel, whether people are trolling you, whether people are getting suckered in by different ideologues that you know are not benefiting anybody. 5 of Pentacles is excommunication from a church, from a society, from a community, from Instagram, from fucking, you name it. And again, we have the Skeksis Emperor, symbolising the interests of the corporate, running down, trickling into ground level, into the level of people speaking like we are today, and where they get their ideas, and actually how that follows up to people getting financial benefit from other people believing a certain thing. If you haven't seen Manufacturing Consent, or you haven't come across Noam Chomsky, now is the fucking time. I will link him below. It is absolutely worth having on in the background, just to understand how media manipulations of even what we believe on a really personal level sometimes serve what is politically going on, and how that works structurally and linguistically. Because believe you me, a lot of the ideas that people say, well, I just choose to live this way with my own autonomy, and I just think it's cleaner to do this, and I just think it's nicer to do this, and I just think for me, I want to do this thing. So many of those ideas come from corporate incentives, or indeed from, I'm going to say it, like the global war machine, right? And the money that feeds into and out of that. And I'm not going to get into militaristic stuff and who I support and who I don't, and whether we should have defences and all the rest of it. And if you've served, thank you, whatever. It's not an attack on you to say these things. But there are certain things that seem to be personal, which feed into the collective in an interesting way right now. And you are being pointed to them. And you are being asked to examine where the things that you're putting out creatively are feeding back to you that you are not well received by the community in a way that actually reflects that you're not agreeing with corporate interest, rather than that you're not agreeing with your friends, your family, right? I have so many friends that have ideological structures that I don't necessarily agree with, and yet we manage to be good humans to each other and see eye to eye and help each other and love each other, right? And I think this is you getting into that thing of like, you don't need to be in agreement with me on everything. Part of the way that all of this big stuff is going on, and part of the stuff fueling the conflicts, is this kind of new thing where we virtue signal online and we form tiny tribalistic societies of, well, I think this thing about this country and you don't, so you can fuck off and die. And it's like dividing people at ground level so that way higher up where the puppet strings are happening, we don't have enough strength to actually revolt against what's going on in a bigger way. And this is your calling, if you're on a spiritual path, to examine that kind of itty-bitty low-level tribalism. and say, where is it that you think that because somebody disagrees with you on a certain thing, you have to shun them and treat them as a lesser human? And how does that actually conflict with what your deep spiritual beliefs are? Particularly if you do vibe with things like Christianity. Because Jesus wouldn't have done that shit. He wouldn't have ostracized an entire community or excommunicated an individual based on disagreement in terms of values. He would have tried to bless that person, teach that person, hang out with them where other people might not have done. He was a very cool guy. Okay, the Hierophant, again, booking of tradition, resistance against dogma, also about community, also about relationship to divinity versus power, right, as symbolised by this. And with the peacock feather as well, there is, again, this element of performativity coming into this. What do people project that they believe online versus what do they actually do? And discerning from your own feedback, symbolised by this rainbow coming in, what feels like it's from divine inspiration to a person versus what feels like it's been taught or indoctrinated or terrified into the way that they're moving through the world. And how can you, as somebody who's maybe slightly on the outside of those kinds of structures now, see a way to return them to inspiration? And notice I didn't say correct their assumptions. I didn't say persuade them in a certain direction. Again, I didn't say convert them to your way of doing stuff. It's re-inspiring those who are under dogma in this card, and particularly in this deck. It's saying that if you have this as above connection, you can be the person to ground something which speaks to an individual on an artistic level, on a creative level, on the level of doing good work in your daily, that softens them up to, or not even softens them up to because that sounds manipulative, but that opens them up to their own forms of inspiration and divine light. You can't see the refraction of a rainbow through a crystal creating something beautiful without thinking of the original light source. That's why we had all these rainbows earlier, and that's why it's coming up again in this card. You can't see the spectrum without beginning to see the pure white light that is the same for everyone that shone to create all those colours. So by showing people the colours that speak to them, you are leading them back to the light that makes all colours. And I almost want to leave it there, but we've got this Ace of Cups card, which is to say divine love. This is Holy Grail. This is being wonderful to your fellow man. This is just being a force of love in the world. And I'm hearing the Beatles now, love is all you need, right? If you haven't watched Yellow Submarine or you haven't seen that particular video, I encourage you to watch it, even if you hate the Beatles, just because there is a wonderful truth to that song, which personally I always have a visceral reaction to. I can't watch the animated version of that without crying. Because it really is all you need. It really is all that runs through everything. The force that we were speaking about running through things and communicating with you and relaying stuff to other people through you and inspiring others and leading everything to happen, whether it's Henson or Disney or tarot or whatever, is love. The truth is love. And the destructive tide that we talked about that's running through everything and fucking up everyone's lives so that they actually look at themselves and they look at how they are to each other, that is also a kind of love. It is also a call back to love. Really, the issue of call and response is much wider, because the call in a broad sense is that we are entering a time of turmoil globally in order to respond with kindness. And that speaks to the sort of political situations in certain places right now that I can't legally mention. It speaks to the individual and what you get rid of and what you put out and what you get back. And it speaks to the planet in a time where we've royally fucked up our sanctuary, our respite place, this home where we live. And we've been asked to come up with a solution to that, not through confusion, not through conflict and power games, not through war, but through inspiring each other in just the right fashion, that our ideas can lead to breakthroughs that help to heal. Individualistically, in terms of engineering, in terms of conflict, all of it, right? And what you're really being led to, if you've come this far, and we are at the end of this kind of process, is that you are one of the people right now, whether or not you feel big or powerful or connected, who is being called to receive inspiration and work with it so that you can inspire people who are going to save our asses in these situations and people who are going to do great things. You may also do great things yourself. This is not to say that you won't be the main character in your own life, but it is to say that we're all stood on these different stairways. We all have different ideas of where gravity is. We're all in this kind of puzzle together, and we're all looking from different directions on what in the end is one light source. So your job is to look at the prism, the rainbow that this shines through, and look at the particular colours in that spectrum, the particular fields, the particular media, the particular words, the particular skill sets that you can use in your best way, in a way that you will excel personally, because you know you've got that nailed, to inspire other people and to boost everybody's vibration, to boost everybody's happiness, so that they feel there is hope, so that they point their efforts to God, even if that's not what they believe in, so that they are inclined to a higher mind, even in their power. Really, this whole thing is asking you to tune in, to know when to not intervene and when to intervene, to know when information feels good, feels real, feels positive in your own body and like it's the right thing, versus when it's misleading and trying to block this kind of process for you, so that you can inspire, so that you can heal yourself and heal others, so that you can self-inspire, self-cleanse, create your own sanctuaries, your own dream world, not isolated from the real world, but as a place that other people can get inspiration and receive light and receive hope and goodness. You are being asked to have the kind of hope and faith about the future that is narratively being dismissed at best and discredited at worst. Love is the only reality. Hope is the only reality. And it surpasses dogma. It busts through it with no effort. It is a destructive thing, right? It's bashing down the walls of everything that came before. And that's part of your job. So if you're seeing this, I adore you. You're one of mine, right? We're in this together. Subscribe if you haven't. And with honesty coming in as the final thing, it's okay to be honest with yourself about what your role is. It's okay to look for honesty in the things that you're receiving. For some of you, it's okay to expect honesty of the people that surround you and to let them go if they're not being entirely honest. But honesty, really, we think of as being like telling unfortunate truths or revealing information that might be difficult to handle. And I want you to kind of shunt that out of it for a minute and think of the true honesty, the real truth under everything, as being love, as being inspiration, and as being hope. Be honest about how much hope you have for a future that is spiritually charged, ever-loving, completely protective, and for the good of all. I'll catch you later.